So I can see the numbers steadying out for the moment. So let's kick off. I'm Jenny Reindorp. I'm Interim Director of Programmes at NHS Providers, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. I'm particularly delighted we're doing it today rather than yesterday or Monday, because I think we might have struggled. So I hope everybody's enjoying the slight reduction in temperatures. We definitely in NHS Providers were thinking of our members, particularly over the last 48 hours, and what an unbelievably challenging time that you will have had in a very challenging wider context. This event today is part of an NHS Providers programme on how trust-wide approaches to improvement led by the board can help in this next phase of pandemic recovery and beyond. It's great to have a really diverse range of participants from different board roles. We certainly had sign up from chairs and chief execs, medical nursing directors, COOs, directors of transformation, directors of ODs, a really good representation from non-executives. So it's a fantastic cross-section of roles for our discussion today. The programme aims to facilitate peer learning between board members from trusts at different stages of their improvement journey. And we're delighted to be partnering in this programme with the Health Foundation. I'm sure you're aware they've done extensive work on this topic, and we're also drawing very much on the learning from their Q community. I suspect many of you are members of that Q community, and it's a connected group of improvers working together to transform health and care quality across the UK and Ireland. In terms of the format for today's session, it's what we call in our jargon a deep dive session. So the intention is to provide an opportunity for board members, for you to hear from board members from a single trust about their experience in leading improvement. We're just going to spotlight those on the panel today, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. So it's really designed as an opportunity to really zoom in on the board's role in embedding a shared approach to improvement across the trust, and obviously in the current context, how to share approaches across organisational boundaries, thinking of provider collaboration and your other wider trust system partners, and how do we tease out the actionable insights that other boards can learn from. I'm really delighted today and very grateful to welcome 4 members from the East London NHS Foundation Trust Board who've kindly agreed to join us to share their experiences. So it's a welcome to Paul Calaminus, Chief Executive, Eileen Taylor, Acting Chair of the Board, Amar Shah, Chief Quality Officer, and Richard Fradgley, Executive Director of Integrated Care. Welcome to you all. I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves more fully in a moment as you reflect on your individual as well as your collective roles in leading improvement in East London. But just again on the format for today, we're not having set piece presentations. The aim is to really have a conversation and to very much draw in questions from colleagues and to highlight the practical learnings that you can take away. We've circulated a note in advance that's just given you a little bit of background on East London and its improvement journey. So I'm hoping that means we can focus very much on the how, not just on the what. And in terms of a quick bit of housekeeping, just the obligatory Zoom housekeeping, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So in a minute, we'll remove the spotlight. And if you're able to be off camera, that's great. Do just put your hand up or raise your electronic hand if you'd like to come in, pop any thoughts in the chat. If you've got resources that you'd like to share on your own trust work on improvement, again, do please put links in the chat, and we will also put some links into programme resources and details of events that we've got coming up. And if you haven't already clocked, we are recording today's session, and we always find there's a lot more people who express an interest and are able to come along on the day, as sure you'll all understand. And we find that, you know, at least a couple of hundred people watch the video back. So that's why we're recording today. So without further ado, thank you for bearing with me on the intros. Let's get cracking. And I'm just going to kick off before I bring in a couple of comments that people have already submitted in advance. I just wanted to ask each board member in turn chance to give some opening reflections on how you each view your role in supporting your kind of ambitions for a trust-wide approach to improvement. And I was going to ask Paul to kick off before I turn to Eileen, and then bring in Amar and Richard. So Paul, over to you to just start off the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And And as Jenny said, I'm Paul Calaminus. These days I'm Chief Exec here at Elft. It's probably relevant to say before I was in this role, I was Chief Operating Officer. And in terms of sort of thinking a bit about the role and quality improvement, and really trying to support quality improvement as a way of working, I think. So I think for me, there's a lot in this role about obviously how we really use our quality improvement methods, use quality improvement tools, think in terms of improvement in everything we're trying to do. I think, without wanting to be trite about this, I think the improvement word's incredibly important. I think there are lots of words, lots of ideas, lots of concepts that are used all across the NHS and in other industries that are about change and transformation and making things different. This is explicitly about, can you identify something? Can you say, how do you want to improve it? And then, do you know if that's happening or not? And what can you try? And so for me, I think there's just a huge amount in the concept of, are we improving? Do we know? And then what agency does that give to teams and individuals? What capacity does that give people and teams to try things and to improve? And I think for me, there's all sorts of things that flow from that about how you can help teams connect to the board to connect to teams, to different managers, other groups of people doing things in the organisation. And I think in essence, that's how I see my role in terms of quality improvement. It's really trying to support this as a way of working. How embedded is it in everything we do? This method helps us say what isn't working, but then it helps us go beyond that and say, so what do we want to do about it? And then how do we know what might be working? And to keep coming back to that as a method, I do think is incredibly important and powerful. I think I'll stop there, and maybe should I pass on to Eileen for her reflections from a chair perspective.
Fantastic, Paul. Fantastically succinct and some really powerful themes to start us off. So yeah, Eileen.
Good morning, all, and thank you so much for having us. It's a lot of fun to do something together, and I'm sure we'll take something away from it as well. Our strategy is to improve the quality of life for the people that we serve. So quality improvement, by definition, is embedded in what we do. And so to improve the quality of life of our service users, we have to be constantly improving as well. For those of you that may have looked at the ELF strategy, you may have seen that quality improvement is one of our organizational treasures, but so is people participation. And so for me, my role in quality improvement, the board's role, is making sure that it's relevant, making sure that what we do in quality improvement is relevant. And one way we do that is by listening to our service users. Our service users play a very big role in our quality improvement journey. And if any of you ever have the opportunity to attend one of our quality improvement conferences and sit at the various tables about the improvements that have been led in the trust, you will hear many of the stories are stories that you'll hear from service users who have come up with the ideas and who have co-produced the improvements with us. It's also, I was looking back at some notes this morning to the inflection point that we reached in 2020. And at our board meeting in March of 2020, we set out our improvement journey for the next year. And that was rapidly changed in April with the onset of the pandemic. And I was reminded of how quickly we pivoted the work of the quality improvement team and the quality improvement agenda to support the trust in delivering what it needed to do during the pandemic. And I think it's also important to state that the quality improvement team isn't just something that sits on the side. It's actually embedded. So I was in meeting with the team a couple of weeks ago, and they are embedded in our services. They're embedded with our service users. So it's not an improvement journey that Amar's team takes, although they bring a huge amount of expertise and they teach us all about how to do it. But the most important thing I think they do is that they embed the learning in the trust amongst our services and with our service users. And I was reminded of this a few weeks ago when I was interviewing someone for an executive position. And in response to a question on quality improvement, he talked about how quality improvement is embedded in his thinking of everything that he does in the trust. And he doesn't necessarily take out a piece of paper and draw a driver diagram when he's faced with an issue, but it's just embedded in the way that he does everything he does. And so I think that might be something that we tease out today in the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic, Eileen. So how do we think about this as a mindset shift that's fully integrated into people's kind of everyday approaches? Richard, can I go to you?
Yes, of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Fradgley. I'm the Director of Integrated Care for the Trust. Broadly, that involves strategy, planning, partnerships, some of our strategic transformation programs. I guess when I was thinking about this initial question, I was thinking about some of the things that I do personally in my role to support and sustain improvement. And I'm just going to share three things. The first of which I think is that I genuinely, truly believe that quality improvement is the way into tackling some of the complex problems that we're grappling with in health and social care at the moment. That belief is founded on having attended many of our training programs, being involved in our system, national and international learning networks, a lot of reading. Founded on those things actually is, I now think quality improvement when I'm thinking about a problem. And you might be able to see behind me some post-it notes on my wall. This is actually a driver diagram. Slightly messy. It does look neater on the computer. This is a driver diagram which is helping us to think about how we improve outcomes, quality and value for people with serious mental illness living in supported accommodation in Bedfordshire and Luton. It's been the way in for us to kind of organise some of our thinking about the drivers and the change ideas that we want to test. Secondly, championing quality improvements. A lot of my time as Director of Integrated Care is spent working with system partners in our developing integrated care systems. And very often the problems that we're grappling with within our systems are sort of fundamentally, you can see how quality improvement as both a philosophy, but also as a set of tools and techniques will help us to make some impact on those. Just very recently, we've been thinking about in both of our integrated care systems in which we work in North East London and Bedfordshire, Luton, Milton Keynes about inequity and how we respond to the inequalities challenge that we are all grappling with across the country at the moment. And just by way of an example, with some of the new funding that's been ring-fenced for inequalities this year, we've been working in two of our boroughs to run that and invest in QI infrastructure to support all partners, support a bottom-up approach with our teams from across partners, whether that's acute partners, the community mental health services, general practice, the voluntary sector councils, to run a kind of pursuing equity programme in which we are encouraging any team that's identified a problem with equity that they want to tackle to join a learning system with the right QI infrastructure to support them to do that effectively. Thirdly, leading and sponsoring QI projects or programs, which I have to say is one of the most enjoyable things that I do in my role as Director of Integrated Care. Just as an example, I'm sponsoring a QI project in Tower Hamlets at the moment, which is about improving communication between our community health services and general practice And I met with the team yesterday to think about the first driver diagram that they produced, with an aim to reduce rejected referrals from 30% to 10%. Some really great thinking about what the drivers are and what the change ideas are. Some really practically focused stuff that people can get on with and do quite quickly with regards to how we communicate more effectively with GPs, but also some more medium-term stuff with regards to the fuller review and how we use that as a vehicle to really implement some changes with regards to how our neighbourhood health and care teams work effectively together. So those three things: believing in it, championing it, and leading and sponsoring QI programs and projects.
Fantastic, Richard. Another set of really powerful insights, and keen that we kind of come back to that theme about working with system partners kind of later in the conversation. But thank you very much, and it's great to see the post-it notes in the back so we can see this is live in action. Amar, last but not least, and some opening reflections from you, please.
Thanks, Jenny. So I'm Amar. I'm a clinician. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist and chief quality officer at ELFT. I should probably say that I'm probably one of only 2 chief quality officers in the UK at the moment, so it's a slightly unusual role, and that's perhaps something we also want to think about today, is what does that role offer to an organisation in thinking about improvement and sustaining it. I've been at ELFT now for probably about a decade in a variety of roles, but the journey of improvement over time has given me the opportunity to see how we can shepherd an organisation through adopting and nurturing an improvement approach, and really thinking about how we build it into the way that we think and work as an organisation. And that's what I really see my role as chief quality officer. Part of it's about bringing expertise in quality management to the board to inform the way that we think about issues and tackle issues and grapple with issues. Part of it's also about making sure that the executive team all lead and champion and own improvement in their respective work. So it's not seen as just something that I lead, but it's something that we collectively lead. And to do that, we really have to build belief, as you've just heard from Paul and Richard, particularly about how it can actually help us to solve problems in a more effective way, and it connects to the things that we care about in our portfolios as executive directors, and to think about how we then engage the non-executive directors to build belief and see how it connects to running a more effective organisation, delivering our strategy in a better way. Part of the role is also about, how do we reorganise and redesign our organisation so that it's an effective improvement organisation. And, the NHS is renowned for being a very hierarchical structure. So how do we create something that's a little different, that allows innovation and space? And then, over 10 years, we've designed a very different infrastructure to support improvement, making sure that everybody has the skills they need, but also has access to support right close at hand. They don't have to go very far to find someone who can help them with their improvement work. And I guess the final thing is, as a chief quality officer, really making sure that we're connecting improvement work. So it's not sitting in isolation, as Eileen described it, because that would be a real risk. But how does improvement work fit into our management system so that improvement work connects to how we assure ourselves that we're providing good quality care? How do we plan effectively every year and develop our strategy? All of those things should collect as part of our management system. And then how do we make sure that improvement is really delivering our strategy? It's not isolated projects here and there that are nice to do, but actually the work is connected deeply to what really matters most for our service users and our staff in our teams, and also connects to our organizational priorities. That's not an easy thing to get that balance right, but those are what I see as my roles in this work.
Thank you so much, Amar. There is a lot in there for us to run at. We've got an hour, so this feels like very bite-sized. I'm going to just open it up for some, there's lots of questions I've got on the back of that, but I'd just like to throw it out at this stage to colleagues. And there's a question that's been submitted in advance, but I just want to check whether there's somebody who wants to come in at this point. And team, if it's possible to have everybody in view, that would be great. I'm just seeing if anybody has got their hand up. And while I'm going to wait for you to just think, one of the questions that was just asked, submitted in advance by Dr. Francis Andrews, and I'm going to just check to see whether Francis is on the call. You are great. Thanks for the wave. Francis' question was really touched a bit on what you started to share there, Amar, about the infrastructure that you've put in place underneath the board, and because you've managed to, build over time a significant team to support the kind of embedding of the approach across the trust. How did you manage to make the business case for building that team over time? And then Francis, do please kind of chip in with further questions. Amar, shall I go to you on that one?
I can start, and it'd be interesting to hear Eileen and Paul's perspective on the business case too, because this is about demonstrating return as well. The business case for this is not an easy one to make. I remember writing it 10 years ago now, and it's a really hard business case because it's not the traditional business case. This obviously is about a complete change in the way the organization functions, a rebalancing of where the power sits in an organization, how are problems solved. That's a philosophical change as much as it is a new type of service you might be writing a business case for. But part of developing the business case was about building the belief, really, that this is a better way to operate. And I think that's where we should start thinking about what is the variation across our board at the moment in their belief about improvement being a better way to solve problems. How might we help influence people to be able to connect to places where this work's happening and read about it and find out what difference it can make? We certainly took a lot of time over that. We took 2 years with the board, taking them to visit other places, going to conferences, speaking to people, lining up, our board chair with another board chair to have a one-on-one conversation, and our coup to have a similar conversation with another coup who was a little bit further along in their improvement journey, so they can ask those questions that they really want to know answers to in a safe space. That's really what helps build the case for this. And then you need to be able to demonstrate return. You don't need a huge team to start this work. We started this work with 2 people in 2014. And as you demonstrate the return, I think you grow. And as the work grows, your infrastructure grows. We still don't have a huge team at the center of this, because again, if improvement is driven from the center, that sort of defeats the point. It needs to be driven from the point of care. And so you need an infrastructure that allows teams to have access to the support they need really close at hand, not just improvement support, but support to involve people with lived experience, their service users, in their work. That's not always easy. People need help with that. So you need different types of support available in your infrastructure. I don't know whether that's a reasonable place to start and see if there's any further questions you want to bring in. I'll hear from Eileen and Paul about what they see as the return on their investment as a board in
So if I can jump in for a minute, Jenny, on that. So one of the things, it isn't always hard. It isn't always easy to see the business case. And so if you look at the outcomes that we're looking at for our strategy, it's improved population health, improved experience of care, improved staff experience, and improved value. I would say on the first 3, there are real outcomes from the quality improvement journey. We'd like to see more on the improved value, and that's something that we're working on and happy to dig into. But when I look at, particularly the last 2 years, one of the things that our quality improvement methodology and the fact that quality improvement is embedded in the organization helped us do is it helped us very quickly figure out how do we capitalize on the things that we learned in the pandemic, things that we were doing differently that should be embedded in going forward operations. So we were able to learn from that, embed that in the trust, I think, very quickly because we've got this infrastructure in place. But it also helped us address with some of the really thorny issues that the pandemic has shone a spotlight on. And I would say inequalities is one. And so we have been working very closely with the quality improvement team on waiting lists, as I'm sure many other people on this call has. And one of the most often asked questions at our board is, so what? And so when we looked at the waiting lists and the quality improvement lens, There was a challenge from the board of we need more. What do we do with this? And what the team did is they actually helped the board look at waiting lists through an equalities lens. So we were actually able to see where people from different groups were perhaps on waiting lists longer, not accessing appointments as quickly, et cetera. And so it is now the next step is what do we do with that information? But because we have these processes embedded, we can pivot very quickly to capitalize on good things, but also to really identify and address problems that are being thrown up our way.
I add one thing. Sorry, I don't want to hold the because I'd agree with everything that's been said, and the point about building the will, I think, is really, really important. I think the other bit in terms of business case is actually the current costs of not having a method that helps you solve complex problems. So if I think about if I think about the area where personally I would say in terms of sort of business case, our approach to QI has funded itself many times over. Actually, it's in the reduction of violence and aggression on inpatient mental health wards. That's real, that's staff off sick, injured, patients hurt, longer length of stay, harm that's going on. Reducing that consistently by up to 50% is an enormous contribution, quality improvement, improvement to experience for everyone involved. Now, I don't think before we embarked on that work, we'd counted the cost of the levels of violence and aggression. So what I suppose I'm also saying is that I think actually having a method that really enables one to try and solve complex problems does produce some of those returns on investment. One of the things it does is actually brings into sharp focus things we've tolerated for years quite often that are harms that do have costs attached to them, but that we don't always recognise.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's very compelling. And I just wanted to ask Francis if you would like to come in and just make any comments on the back of that.
I'm not going to hog the conversation other than to say I found that inspiring. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Yeah, I agree, Francis, and thank you for the great question. There's also a question that's just come in the chat from John Geeve. Thank you for that. How does the role of Chief Quality Officer fit within the executive team? Shall I throw to Amar on that one?
Oh, maybe Paul. You want to describe how it fits within your team?
Well, we could play tennis, or we could play ping pong with this question for the next half of that. I'll have a go, and then let me say from my perspective, and then I am going to pass back to you, Amar, from your perspective, maybe. Amar's role very much brings it is a lot of what he described. It very much brings a capacity for us at board level and exec level to keep a focus actually on quality and quality improvement. How we try and think about planning for quality, what it means to, what does it mean for our governance systems to be able to focus on quality, for example. How do we think, and increasingly I think there's been a lot that's been about the interrelationship then with some of the ICB and ICS structures, which, dare I say it, are quite traditionally focused on quality assurance. It's very different to some of the ideas then about quality planning, quality improvement, quality control, and so on. I think having a role around the exec table and around the board table with an explicit focus on quality also enables us to really integrate this way of thinking and working into the trust strategy. I don't think we would have the same capacity to keep the strategy focused and working in the way that it does if we didn't have the role. And I think the role also helps us create and then kind of enjoy almost constructive tension in the exec, actually. So we have, obviously, we have a chief nurse and all the CQC work, we have chief medical officer, we have chief quality officer, we have the chief operating officer. And I think that gives us greater problem solving capacity, greater ability to recognize things, different perspectives, and then greater actually capacity and ability to use that and use those different perspectives and use some of the tension that's sometimes created there to try and problem solve. And so, Amar, let me pass to you for your kind of perspective.
And I've also noticed, Richard, you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you in a sec. Amar.
I mean, the CQO role is pretty normal in some other health economies. It was something that Bruce Keogh recommended in the wake of his review in 2013 of trusts which had higher mortality than normal. There is a specific skill set to be a chief quality officer that is sometimes not that easy to recruit to, and there is a risk that if we just combine quality into a professional lead like a medical role. I speak as a medic myself. I had zero training in systems thinking or improvement as a medic, despite all of the postgraduate learning I've done. Or a chief nurse, there is a risk that you will not gain the benefit of that specific skill set around systems thinking, learning, improvement, quality management, which I think brings that creative tension. Obviously, I work very closely with the chief nurse, the chief medical officer, and the chief operating officer, and we think about challenges together and make sure there's a consistency in our approach. But it's also about going beyond quality. To be a really effective chief quality officer, you have to be able to influence the whole way the organization thinks. So, part of that is about influencing planning and strategy. Part of it's about influencing performance, which is why I have the performance brief as well as the quality brief. Thinking about how we use data, which is why I have the analytics brief. Thinking about how we manage operations day to day so that we have really good quality control. It's about influencing all of those areas.
Thanks, Amar. And Richard, I'm really sorry not to see your.
No, that's all. It's fine. I didn't want to take the conversation backwards, but just on Amar's last point. So we work together as the joint executive leads for strategy execution, and planning. So we, as a consequence of that, are bringing together our work externally in our integrated care systems around planning in particular. With the QI focus and QI lens that we bring to our internal work around strategy and strategy execution, and it feels like we have a really good sort of two slightly different perspectives that we bring together in making sure that we have a credible and sustainable strategy. Just on the business case point, Just to note, I guess that with the Health and Care Act, we now have a statutory responsibility, both in the integrated care systems and in providers, to deliver on the triple aim to improve outcomes, quality and value. And given where the triple aim comes from, there's a kind of unique correspondence, I think, between quality improvement as both a philosophy and approach, and how you think about the delivery of the triple aim. And I do think that there is something about quality improvement as a method, as a tried and trusted method for delivering change in complex circumstances, complex systems, which really lends itself to the business case that we're all working on at the moment to work out how integrated care systems work in practice. There's been a lot of focus on what in sort of standing up the infrastructure for 1st of July, but that question about, well, how are integrated care systems going to work in practice? Quality improvement has got to be at the heart of that.
Yeah, many thanks, Richard. I think that's absolutely right, and a potential kind of way of simplifying a lot of complexity by having that kind of shared language and approach and methodology. I'd like to bring in from the chat some great questions from Kate. And I'm just going to read them out, and then Kate, do feel free to kind of pitch in. So 2 questions. One on how does QI help to ensure robust prioritization of effort and improvement across the trust? And how do the trust performance management mechanisms embed and reinforce a QI culture? Who would like to come in on the first one about how does QI help to ensure a robust prioritization of effort?
I'm happy to start, and then others can add in. I mean,
Thanks,
really good questions. Improvement has helped us prioritize, I think, because that's part of the discipline of the method. There is definitely an opportunity for us in the way we go about improvement to design in our organization how we want to prioritize, and some places choose to prioritize differently. Some choose to have a much more board-led approach to defining priorities, and others prefer to have a much more bottom-up approach. I think we really need to decide what's going to work best in the context of your culture. We try to marry the both so that we allow teams to pick what really matters and have an open conversation with their service users and patients about what's the big thing we really want to get better at. And then we build the infrastructure into our operational structures so that they have to get the go ahead for that from their senior clinical leads, so that teams aren't just improving whatever they feel like, but that there's a link to what really matters, and they have to pitch that this is what we want to work on and why. And that's given the go ahead in an operational QI forum. So that's how we sort of make sure there's alignment between what teams really want to work on and what matters to the directorates and to the alignment with our strategic priorities. It's obviously a bit of an art to that. It's not a science, I don't think. It's a bit of an art, and it's all through conversation and dialogue rather than through numbers. But I think we've got a pretty good mix now. When we look at our 130 odd improvement efforts underway at the moment, we can match them all to elements in our strategy, and that's a good sign, I think. But there will always be teams that want to work on things that aren't in our strategy, but they are equally valid because they matter to the patients that we're serving in that particular service and to the staff working there. It's quite an interesting question about performance, because we've got an unusual approach here where I sort of lead on performance as well as our quality approach, and I wonder what Paul would think from his previous role as Ku or Richard, because you've got a role around performance, thinking about the whole system's performance, whether there's any benefits in, or how you've seen our approach to performance change over the years, because we've certainly done things differently over the years around performance and quality.
So, I mean, when I arrived in Elf, I think when I arrived in Elf, which is 6 years ago now, 7 years ago now, I came from I was a Q already, and I very much came from performance management, and we had big meetings, and it was assurance, and things were red, amber, green, and RAG rated. And I think one of the things that's really struck me about working in Elft has been that it's really the focus on what's going on, as opposed to what's going on, what in terms of the system, in terms of how things are working. Do we really understand areas where things aren't quite working? Because that then obviously helps us to know what to try and do about them, or what kind of tools and techniques to kind of bring to bear. And I think there's something that goes with that, which is about, and this is a kind of constant conversation, I think, and constant work with teams, which is about, do people understand and accept the importance of some of the performance targets that are there? Do we agree with the importance of some of them that are there? And if so, how much are people really owning them and then really trying to develop and improve services against them? And so one of the things Amar and his team have also done is, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, so Amar will have to correct me, but has kind of reduced the number of KPIs for the trust from, I want to say, about 6,000 or 7,000 to about 2,500 to 3,000. So half them. Now, I think 2,500 to 3,000 is still quite a lot, really. But then we do provide lots and lots of different services in lots of different places. And so I suppose that's part for me of, do you have a performance system that's really aiming at things that we all agree really matter? And then do we know what's happening? are things getting better or worse? And then as teams, and then as the directorates in the trust, what are we doing about that? And it's those kind of set of questions in that order, which in my experience anyway, are not always so typical.
Really great reflections there, and again a lot to think about. We've got some more questions coming out in the chat which I'd like to pull out. I'm just going to go to David Selwyn's question about reflecting on his board and a concern that there's probably different perceptions of quality or patient safety and what it means. How did you in East London agree a unified understanding and kind of definition of what you're talking about? Eileen, I don't know whether you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, I'll come in, and then I think I'd like to hand over to Amar. So it's a really good question because it evolves all the time. And so when I joined the board about 4 years ago, we were getting into infinite detail on patient safety issues at the board, so much so that we were lost in the weeds. And I think it was hard for the board to see really what the issues were. So we pulled it up, and then actually we found that we pulled it up to too high of a level. And so it's a constant process of evolution. We drive a lot of it through, there's an internal quality committee, but then there's a quality assurance committee where we've got external NEDs who are clinicians, and then I've been sitting on it as a non-clinician. So I always ask the dumb questions on what does this mean? But we're always playing with it in terms of what is the right definition, and we do change it. It's something that's live, and it really depends on what's going on. You know, we have a big community of service users who fit the learning disability category, and so that necessarily has taken more of a focus in the last year to 18 months. But it's constantly evolving, and maybe Amar can talk about how the executive responds to the challenges from the board on this evolution.
Thanks, Eileen. I think you're right, David, that there is a risk that we view patient safety as different from quality and set up different systems for that. I think there's more of a risk of that happening if we're assurance minded. Particularly around patient safety, we can easily create a whole industry around the assurance of safety, and then view that as very different to our approach to quality. I don't think we can define quality. Quality's got to be defined by our end users, right? Whether they're clinicians using the services of our corporate teams or patients using our clinical services, they define what quality means for them. But it's about really making sure that we are applying an understanding of what the different dimensions of quality are. So recognizing that there's a safety dimension to it, but there's also an efficiency and an effectiveness dimension. There's also an experience dimension. There's an equity dimension. If we don't view quality in the round with all those lenses, we're definitely missing something. And it's about the balance, making sure we're not overly weighted towards one compared to the others.
On risk of hogging this, could I just add one thing, which is, I also personally think this is a really, really good kind of unitary board sort of question, in the sense of, I do think one of the big questions here is, what are people worried about? And actually, you know, within however we've defined it, just what are people worried about? Because I think, you know, there's loads of different ways we get that kind of, you know, intelligence or, you know, things we're fretting about. And I just think that in and of itself is like one of the most protective bits of this, is if somebody's worried about something, we should all be worried about it. And then like how we're trying to improve and so on.
Sometimes the simplest question is the most powerful. Paul, thank you for that. I'd like to bring in Kate, a non-executive. This is a bit of a build out from the conversation we started, but Kate's saying in her trust they've already got QI focus and culture, and the director's strategy is playing a key role in leading that. But what are the key questions that she should be asking as a NED, as an assurance piece that the trust has got the kind of QI approach that you've been building in East London, and how could board committees drive that forward? I don't know whether Eileen, you'd like to start on that one again.
Outcomes I think it's really around outcomes. So, you know, with our strategy, we've got very clear outcomes that we're driving towards, and are we achieving the outcomes that that we aspire to and that we have agreed? You know, as Paul said, we are a unitary board and we've agreed to it. So, and it isn't, I think, as Paul said, it isn't always in a KPI. It's very often feedback from our service users. So I think that's the simplest way that we look at it.
Thank you, Eileen. And there's also a kind of question from Kate that, given other comments and time, I wonder if perhaps, Amar, we might share some more information for Kate about how you did the work with primary care and Richard and the community teams on the reducing rejected referrals. So perhaps we can kind of commit to doing a bit of sharing on that one after the session, if that's possible. Could I also bring in Andrew on the question of value and the job of making the finances add up? Andrew's saying here, I don't need persuading that better quality helps rather than hinders value for money, but some people see the need for savings as a threat. So how are you using improvement to help make the numbers add up? That's another great way of framing this. And I know, I guess, not having your chief finance officer here, I wonder also about the contribution of that board role in contributing to your kind of board leadership on improvement. Who would like to come in on that one?
I don't mind starting, and then Richard, I think you'll have some really good insights on this too, from some of the work you're involved in. I think the chief finance officer should be a champion for improvement, and we should make it our roles to really help the CFO see the link between improvement and finance. There's no, obviously people will view the need for efficiency savings as a threat. I think it takes quite a lot of work to reframe that. When we began our improvement journey, we were really explicit that it was about quality and not about cost. And so everything is driven from the simple question about what really do we want to improve, what matters most. And usually that's around quality. And we often find that at the end of that, we can then go back and say, oh, and by the way, this has allowed us to be more efficient, or this has allowed us to save spending money on this that we no longer need. We can either avoid cost, sometimes we can remove cost. I think there's some real benefit in finding a few stories to tell. For us, even though the work wasn't driven by cost, we had a number of stories. The violence reduction work was one where we managed to avoid cost being spent on dealing with the sequelae of violence. But we've also found ways to reduce the need for certain types of beds and have been able to remove cost from the system entirely. That work was all driven around people being in hospital when they needed to be, and not about the cost. But it did give a very compelling story about, quality improvement can also help us with our cost saving requirement each year. So I think it's a very gradual one about building belief and giving people the opportunity to then use their improvement skills to spot the waste in their daily work. There is so much waste in the health system. If you spend even 5 minutes working in the NHS, you'll just see how much waste there is. And people, once they have their improvement skills, they naturally, they are natural problem solvers. They will spot these opportunities day to day, and they will want to find ways to become more efficient and improve the system. But we have to then change our approach to cost savings. So in the old days, we would probably have got all of the budget sheets out and we would have looked through them and seen where the cost savings were. I think we have to shift that to a much more approach where teams have to show us where the potential waste is, and that there's a bit of a risk in that. That either they won't be able to deliver it or they can't identify it. It's a much less centralized approach. So we are still in that journey and transition. We're definitely not in a place where we could say that we're confident that all of our cost efficiencies are going to be delivered through improvement work. We're starting to head in that direction, but we're a long way from it. But I think maybe you just start with some tangible opportunities. Richard, you're involved in a few where there are some real opportunities for value improvement across the system by using an improvement method, and might be interesting to share, what's it taken to get belief to go for that.
Do come in, Richard.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I agree entirely that finding the right language is one of the most important starting points, and the language of waste is something that just feels much more meaningful when we're talking to our teams. And we've sort of had some really, really successful trust-wide reducing waste programs where we've encouraged our teams to think about waste and apply quality improvement tools and techniques to then delivering productivity or value opportunities on the back of reducing waste. It does feel as if the kind of next step in the work around waste needs to be in the context of our systems and our system partnerships, as we're starting to think about value from a system perspective. And that is territory which feels much more unexplored, particularly in moving from the old days of QIP and cost improvement programs, kind of held respectively by commissioners and providers the last couple of years with the unique circumstances of the pandemic, into more financially straightened times, and the real need for us to get our heads around how we deliver value from a system perspective. We're beginning to explore some of these questions systematically. This fundamentally, as colleagues on the call will know, a set of questions about how we bring organisations together in the context of their sort of different and unique contracting arrangements, how councils think about value, their different business planning processes, which we're trying to get our heads around very much at the moment. I guess there is something, as Amar says, around sort of metaphor we've been using a little bit about squeezing the orange whilst getting the kind of cogs of quality improvement to whir. And that we're in a position at the moment where we need to do both things. We do need to find those opportunities to deliver our financial viability programme as of today, but we also need to do this work to kind of get the cogs to whir, to release value in a more sustainable way going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. I was going to ask everybody to do one final reflection, but I am quite conscious of time, and I'm sure that some people are going straight into a meeting at 12. So I'm going to just start to draw us to a close. I've got the kind of unenviable task of trying to pull out some key messages, and I think it's been such a rich and thoughtful discussion that I'm not sure I can do justice to that, but and we could have had at least double the time, I think, just to begin to unpack these themes in a bit more detail. But I guess one of the kind of headlines, some of the headlines from me, is about the relevance of improvement and the board's role in demonstrating the relevance of improvement to dealing with the kind of current operational pressures. And it's about a philosophy and a mindset change rather than about tools and techniques, which is sometimes how QI can be caricatured. A theme around collective leadership and how to get cross-board ownership. So the real unitary board dimension of this for NEDs and execs, and that takes time, and that you've really built that ownership and made the kind of business case and the kind of mindset case over time as a board. A theme around embedding, I think that's also been another really strong one, about how do you not have your QI teams in a silo, that they're embedded within your services, co-producing work with your service users, really working with your teams. And so this isn't seen as something in isolation. You're really joining the dots and can see how this connects to the kind of corporate strategy and strategic priorities. And the other one I was going to pull out, I'm sure missing lots of other points, but just the point, Richard, you made about the contribution that improvement has got to dealing with the current system opportunities and challenges, and how that can help have a kind of tried and tested method for delivering change in very complex systems, and how can that help find some cut through and some simplicity when trusts are navigating all of that. So I want to give a really big thank you to members of the board in East London for really taking the time out today together. That's no mean feat and ask, and we really appreciate it. And also thank you to all of you who've joined the call. Just before people dive off, we would be really grateful if you could fill in our evaluation survey about today. If you haven't got time, it's 2 minutes. Do just put any comments in the chat before you go. What's helpful, less helpful, where you'd like us to focus as a programme going forward. We've got a number of webinars coming up to continue the conversation. We've got one on the 1st of August. And also in September on improvement and recovery and improvement within the systems context. So we'll be able to unpack some of the themes from today in those sessions. We'll also have a session at our annual conference in November in Liverpool, if any of you are planning to go. And then we've got lots of resources. I'm going to put some links in the chat. One of the ones I'd really like to highlight is a summary of kind of key reads for board members on improvement. We've tried to pull together some of the key things that boards might find useful, including kind of short blogs, video clips, and not just all the kind of weighty tomes that you might not have time to get through. And we've also got on our kind of online hub recordings of previous webinars, including a deep dive that we had in the same approach as today, with London, Central London Community Foundation Trust. So thank you very much indeed to everybody. It does really feel like a very reflective and rich discussion, and look forward to seeing you if you can make future events as part of this programme. And yes, special thanks to Paul, Amar, Eileen and Richard.